Hello, my name is Mary Sise, and I am so honored to have with me today Peta Stapleton from Australia. And what I love about Dr. Stapleton is that she is so into the research about energy psychology. I can remember when we first doing energy psychology or even any of these weird eye movement things that there was absolutely no brain research at all. And I still have the scans that Bessel van der Kolk did on EMDR that showed the brain was changing. And, and we knew that clinically in our offices, that the images were further away, the flashbacks were stopping, the person, the hyperstartle was complete. I was hearing the same things about tapping as with my EMDR clients. So I knew the scans were eventually gonna catch up, and this was in the mid 90 like, I think it was, like, 1998 or something, those scans came up, but I treasured them because it was like, "Look, I'm not crazy, like, there's really scans now." And so what I'm thrilled to be here with you is to really talk about what is the research showing now, it's maybe 20 years later, some of this, like, what do we know? I know we know so much more about the brain, how the brain works, what's a necessary ingredient for healing, and what happens in the brain with trauma. We know so much more than we ever did years and years ago when we were waiting eyes and tapping on faces. Other than we knew our people were getting better. So I'm thrilled that the research is beginning to kind of catch up, although I know it's in its infancy. So I'm going to turn it mostly over to you, and I'd love
Sure.
for you to share with first a little bit about yourself, and then about what's happening with the research, especially as it relates to trauma, PTSD, a lot of anxiety, those kinds of things. So,
Yeah, thank you, Mary. It's just a pleasure to be here. And anyone that knows me knows that I'm happy to talk about research till the cows come home, but in a nice, easy to understand way, in case anyone's kind of zoning out. Yeah, so I'm here in Queensland, Australia, and probably spent the last 15 years now associate professor in psychology, but researching EFT tapping. And primarily that's because I am licensed a clinical psychologist and came across my kind of pathway about 18 years ago where working with patients with particularly eating problems, mainstream talk therapies just weren't kind of getting the outcomes. And a colleague at the time said, "Hey, I've come across this kind of weird, strange technique." And I'm like, "This is not a good sell." And lo and behold, we go off and we learn back in the day under Gary Craig, and found that it started to work for our patients. So really, the opportunity to start to research that, 15 years ago and be part of this field has been phenomenal. And probably, as much, and you would relate, surprised us as much because we did come to this not with the intent to prove it, but to explore how does this work? What is it that we know? Is meridian the really best explanation or shifting of energy? And we've come such a long way that I'm really keen, to kind of get that message across that we actually know this tapping technique now, acupuncture points, does have an impact not only on the body's biochemistry, but the brain. It's not just a shifting of energy, which was really that conversation, 20 years ago, that we have definitive evidence. We have fMRI now, plenty of EEGs, cortisol testing, and we have gene studies, particularly in that PTSD space, which we'll talk about today, that show tapping changes the body's biochemistry, which I think, and I know people like us, get so excited because we're like, yes, we know
I
I
knew
did
that. It's like I knew that.
That's
I
right.
wanna say I told you so, but that doesn't sound very professional.
No,
Yeah,
yeah.
I
So
told you so. I knew that.
yeah, that's right. So, particularly, I think, Dr. Dawson Church in the US leading some of the research in that trauma space, but particularly things like the gene studies, the first gene study that came out, which you can test gene expression. So, is a gene expressing itself? Do you have symptoms that, match that? Or is it actually down regulated, meaning it's not expressing itself, that type of thing? The first study showing 1 hour of tapping just on things like stress changed the expression of 72 genes, including suppression of cancer, expression, inflammation markers, improvement of immunity genes. So, 1 hour of tapping showing 72 genes associated with a range of different things, but particularly those changing in their expression, meaning when somebody says, "Oh, I feel better," or "I don't feel as worried about my problem," then we actually know the gene expression is matching that. So a study that was a follow on from that, which actually was really landmark, showed that for returning war veterans from the wars that met criteria for post traumatic stress disorder underwent a 10-week EFT program, so 10 sessions of tapping, and had their gene biomarkers measured. So that's done through blood testing, and showed 6 genes associated with that PTSD response, what we would normally see as hypervigilance or nightmares or flashbacks, all down regulated, meaning stopped expressing themselves. The vets themselves said, "Oh, I don't have those worries anymore. I don't have flashbacks. I don't have any nightmares. I'm not having hypervigilance symptoms." And 6 months later, those genes had still not expressed themselves, meaning they didn't meet criteria for PTSD. So knowing that, we're beyond energy and things like that at this point, this tapping acupoint, kind of anything that uses that acupoint stimulation, really is showing that we're having a profound impact, but a lasting one, for a vet to kind of go, "Oh, that's the last thing I think about now," or "No, I processed that," that kind of thing. Even some of our studies, most of mine have been in that food craving weight loss space. And we did a 2-year follow up. And 2 years later, our participants couldn't remember the food that they'd done their tapping on because they didn't have any desire to eat it. And it wasn't part of their lives anymore. So when they go, "I don't even remember what I did tapping on," 2 years later, those neurological changes have actually occurred. So really, really exciting research emerging, in lots of these spaces.
Yeah, I mean, if it's I know we would do tapping, and especially in the early days, and then people would say to me, "Oh, you just distracted me," or "You just," I'm thinking, "I couldn't distract you before I had tapping, well, even with all my charm, like, I distracted what?" But, yeah, and so you knew it, but I love that now we show it. It shows in the brain. It's showing up. Uh,
Yeah, exactly. And there is this one, Dawson Church and I had a look at several studies. So when you have several studies that have measured the same kind of thing, you can analyze it all together. So we call that a meta-analysis. So we actually had a look at all of those comparison studies. So there have been quite a few dismantling studies, if you like, that have pulled apart the technique. So one group might have got tapping without any words. One group might have got tapping on sham points. Another group might have said the words of "I accept this is my problem" and just done breathing, but no tapping. And then comparing all those sort of different conditions. So we had the opportunity to look at all of those studies to find out really what's the active ingredient here. And at a meta analysis level, the stronger the effect, the more it's likely due to obviously what you're finding. And we definitively showed it is the stimulation of the acupoint, not the words necessarily you're saying, that actually gets the outcome. So that's the active ingredient, is if you're in that state of that feeling and you stimulate an acupressure point,
yeah.
that's when you'll get that outcome, whether or not you say words or otherwise.
But so all we do is interview for a second. What some people don't realize is that Roger Callahan actually took all the affirmations out in the
Yes.
beginning. Like, because people were, "Oh, it's your affirmation." So they were blaming it. So he took them out. And then he measured heart rate variability. That was a big thing he was using back like in the 90s. And he took all that out and still had amazing success with heart rate variability measures. So
Yeah,
well, now I kind of have to laugh sometimes when people spend all this time trying to get the exact right affirmation. I mean, I use the affirmations or the accepted. I also do a releasing intention statement, but mostly just to focus the energy, the thought, to focus the thought field. Okay.
Yes.
But, tapping the points. Are you finding any difference if they breathe on the points or rub the points? Have you done any studies about that?
No, no studies that are really compared, say, perhaps, light touch rubbing. What we have actually just completed here in Australia is a chronic pain trial. So we have been really exploring that space. And sometimes chronic pain patients find it painful, for example, fibromyalgia, where it's tender and sore. And so we're actually still getting outcomes with light touch rather than active tapping in that space. So that's actually evidence that it's just the light stimulation that's required,
Right.
not even active kind of, quite hard tapping. So the pain
Right.
space tells us a little bit of that.
You know,
Yeah.
because for a while we were doing a lot of touch and breathe work where you would just touch on the point and breathe.
Yes.
And I found that to be just as effective, although some people like the tapping and some people it agitated them. So they did
Yes.
better with the breathing. I found that when they were depressed, the tapping really seemed to energize them more than the breathing. The breathing was, but oftentimes when they were anxious, the breath there worked better. So
Yeah.
I didn't find a difference with that, but I'd love to see what the research shows.
Yes, we have actually looked at the differences of depression and anxiety in
Mhm.
application. So I actually
Oh,
did
okay.
an expert consensus study where we interviewed practitioners that had, lots and lots of years experience. And that's exactly what they said, that people with anxiety-based disorders actually do better with a slower
Yep.
tapping process and breathing. And you're absolutely right. The activation getting from that parasympathetic back up into sympathetic
Mhm.
for depressed patients, meaning faster tapping is actually indicated. So, I actually have published some of that, and there is a chapter in my book outlining that particular
Okay.
study,
Mhm.
which is the expert consensus from the field, which is important for us to pay attention to.
Mhm. Excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's just fascinating. I'm just so thrilled. Tell me a little bit more about some of the brain studies that you've done and what you've seen. Like, how are they testing that?
Yes. Yeah, so one of the first ones that has emerged, which has come out of here in Australia, was we had the opportunity to run an fMRI, so a functional MRI, which gives us sort of blood flow area information. So more than taking slices of the brain, we're actually looking at, if we get someone to do an activity inside an MRI machine, where does that blood flow go to the brain oxygen, and then we see a signal. So of course, stayed in our space of the food craving. So we had overweight and obese adults pop into the clinic and put them inside the machine and then showed them photos of high calorie food images and said, imagine eating and drinking these foods, that type of thing. Picked foods that we knew would appeal to a white. So these images sort of cycled through on this headset and they kept imagining. So they were in a deficit state, so they actually hadn't eaten or drunken anything in the morning, so they were hungry. And of course, the brain lit up like a Christmas tree, where the minute you start to look at things that are quite appealing, imagine looking at Pinterest after dinner, have a
Yeah.
look at recipes. The brain's like, and the areas that were firing were to do with reward and loss. So they did know they were about to go and do a tapping program for their food cravings, but they were imagining, and so it was that pleasure center, reward loss sort of stuff. So we then sent them off for a 4 week, 2 hours a week tapping programs. They tapped on their own individual food cravings, and that's all done in vivo. So they actually have the food in front of them. And then they all come back in week 5 of the program, have the scan again, images, that type of thing. We had a control group that got no tapping as well. So in that second scan, what we actually saw, so we're sitting on the other side of the machine, kind of going, are they actually looking at the images? Because nothing is firing in the brain and we're looking at these images. And of course, this happens across all of them. But the control group, of course, still lit up like a Christmas tree, because if there is no desire when you look at those images, that part of the brain that we saw in the beginning didn't activate. They were just sort of going, it was neutral. So they all walked out and kind of went, don't have any hunger, don't have any desire, because
Yeah.
they've done the tapping program. And of course, the poor control group still had all of that activation. So just very concerning. We have published that in an open access journal, so people can have a look at those brain scans online. So you can actually see they're on my website as well. So you can just go to peterstapleton.com and link to the journal. And we've just repeated that same fMRI trial for chronic pain patients here in Australia. So we're keen in 2022 to release the outcomes of the chronic pain. So they had a 6-week intervention. So we're going to have a look at the differences there. But we're already getting the verbal feedback from our patients that they're not experiencing the pain. So we're keen to see the regions of the brain that will actually show that. So that will be the second fMRI study. Yeah, it's really it's interesting, Mary, that when you're looking at those brain scans, a bit like Bessel, what he did in the 90s, it's kind of hard to argue with a brain scan that's showing you.
Well, you would think, although people do, but it's really, but like, it's like, I have papers. Like, look, I have a brain.
I know,
Yeah.
I know. Yes,
But, it is. To me, it's when you see it there, it's just like,
yeah,
I knew it. It's not, they're just not, you know, your clients are being nice to you. They're just telling you what you want to hear. I'm like, well, they never told me what I wanted to hear before I started tapping. Why would they start now? You know,
Yeah.
like, come on, do you know who I work with?
I know, I know. And
But
cortisol's that other major biomarker that we've done lots and lots of cortisol studies, particularly in that trauma space as well, where, Dawson Church originally was showing, 24, 25% reduction in cortisol, 1 hour of tapping. And that was far in excess of, reading magazines or, learning psychoeducation about stress. So we repeated that trial here in 2019, but instead of doing it individually, we did it as a group. So we had a group do tapping for stress for an hour, a group do reading magazines, and a group do exactly the same as what Dawson had done, a group that just learnt about stress. But we tested their salivary cortisol before and after and had a look. And interestingly enough, we doubled the effect of the reduction of cortisol by doing it as a group.
yep.
So our group that tapped for an hour, 43% on average reduction in cortisol over 1 hour. Some people were like 50 and 60% reduction in that hour compared to, 19%. And actually our group that read magazines got worse. They had an increase in cortisol by 2%. So clearly they were a bit stressed.
That's looking at all those thin people in the magazine that you don't quite measure up to. You'll straight
Maybe.
right out.
We made them turn their mobile phones off. They probably
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well,
But it's really interesting with that borrowed benefits, that
Mhm.
emerges in this space. That the minute you've got that supportive environment, mirror neurons firing, we actually got almost double the effect of cortisol reduction. So it's really interesting to take that away from a practitioner point of view of people are working, even small groups, you actually do better with that reduction.
That, is making so much sense to me because when the pandemic started and so many people were triggered, I just felt I got to do something. How could I have this technique and not serve them? So one of the things I did was called Tapping Tuesdays at 2 o'clock. So, and I just put an email out. Hundreds of people signed up, usually like 50, 60 people. We're still doing it. Okay. I thought the pandemic was over last year, but that didn't happen. So now it's like even but we
Yeah.
just people come on, everybody taps, somebody chooses to be the guy that's gonna go. They'll raise their hand, they'll come to the front, and we all tap. Inevitably, everybody's got the same issue. It's wild. It's wild, and everybody comes out of it feeling amazing after an hour of tapping as a group. And
Yes.
having worked all my life one-on-one, for the most part, I mean, I would do some groups, but not a lot. It blows my mind. And I love it. We have more fun. Everybody laughs like, oh, who doesn't have this one? And it's so there's no judgment. Does they feel supported? They're doing hearts on the little reactions, and I have people all over the world. They're from Germany, Belgium, France, like somebody from Israel's on. I mean, I don't know how they're hearing about it in one way or another, but they're just coming on and I so enjoy it. I can't seem to stop, but I think I'm getting addicted to maybe the cortisol, maybe that's it. Or the cortisol reduction. I don't know. All I know is we are having so much fun and so many people are being served. And it just I can't, I'm like, and some people come every week, other people just come when they're having a bad week. It's free. It's like, who cares? Just show up. And
Yes.
it's
Wonderful.
spectacular and like
Yeah.
fast, like big healings and like things I never
Yeah.
would have done in a group. But it's I and everybody taps. I said, oh, if you have no issue, just tap for the guy who's going. You ran out of
Mm.
issues this week,
Yeah.
tap for that guy. People
Yeah.
support it. It's just something happens in a group. It's a power
Yes.
of the vortex that
Yeah.
yeah.
No, that's
It's
right.
just so I
And
love that you're doing this research on it because I did
yeah.
it. That's my experience now.
And we have had lots of trials, even in the tapping space, that have compared, being in person to online, and the outcomes are the same. So that's actually really, really good across different topic areas too. But even if you're delivering stuff online or even self-paced, we actually have evidence to show you get the same outcomes. So you actually don't need to be physically with someone. You can
Uh-huh.
still gain that benefit. So we actually have a bank of research around that too. So I think, to know that what you already know clinically is
Yeah.
working is backed then by the research just gives it that extra layer for people out there.
Like,
So
just
fabulous. Yeah,
it's
it's
just
really good. Excellent.
shocking, but
Yeah,
yeah, awesome. Just
great.
awesome. What other brain research you got? Any other brain ones?
Yes, what we've recently been doing, which I know you and I spoke about at the beginning, we've actually partnered with Dr. Stephen Porges from Indiana University in the US. And they reached out to us and sort of said, look, their whole polyvagal theory, they wondered whether or not tapping may actually be impacting that relationship between things like, childhood adverse experiences and trauma or depression, anxiety, but vagal nerve activity and it was a really interesting question because for a long time, we talked a lot about energy 20 years ago and that somehow we were shifting that. But we've really, in the last couple of decades, been sort of questioning no, we actually think we must be having a different impact here, not just on the body, but at that brain level. So, in our most recent chronic pain trial, we actually have been measuring vagal tone activity. So, there's a lovely little heart rate variability monitor that just clips on the ear. And then by doing certain movements, you actually can get a measure of vagal nerve activity and how efficient your vagus nerve is. And that's connected with blood pressure as well. So we've actually been able to, in a subset, people that were local to me were able to come into my office. And this was sort of in a bit of a bubble of when the pandemic wasn't affecting us, thank goodness, where we were able to measure all of this vagal tone activity before and after their 6-week program. And even looking at the screen as I was measuring it, and they're currently analyzing this for us at Indiana University, I could see the differences before and after. So you can actually see that kind of sine wave showing the differences in that chronic pain experience, but that vagus nerve. So we're really excited to continue exploring, in the next couple of years, just that relationship between. I wonder whether tapping is actually, and thinking about where we tap as well,
Right.
where that vagus nerve terminates, but also, the efficiency of how much it gets better over time with regular tapping. Maybe that explains why we have such long-term success that, even in our pain trial, we're doing 12-month follow-up. So I'm sending out those emails and I keep getting emails back from people saying, oh, I forgot I was in your trial last year because I haven't had any pain. I actually forgot that I'd actually done it because it hasn't been in my life. And these are people that have had chronic pain for 15, 25 years.
Yeah.
So we know that these changes last over time, and maybe the vagus nerve is part of that story. So we're really keen in 2022 to start releasing some of those outcomes to see, yeah, exactly what's happening here with that activity, but the efficiency. So Stephen talks about you can improve, and there's lots of things that might improve. We talked about a few of those before we started today. Things will improve your vagus nerve efficiency, which means you don't react in that startle response as quickly and things like that, which of course we see in the tapping world, say hypervigilance or PTSD. So it's an exciting new area that's kind of coming out here, over here.
And it has such ramifications for everything because that vagus nerve is so big. Should be and it impacts the throat, it impacts the breathing, it impacts your stomach and your digestion and everything. So if you can
Yes.
kind of would it be you resetting it or your what do we think this is
Yeah.
doing? Like are we programming it or we what?
Yeah, well, it's almost like perhaps, we talk about the vagus nerve. Of course, we know there's two arms to it, the dorsal vagus, which is that
Right.
older,
Mhm.
kind of unmyelinated. We're wondering whether we're going from improving that dorsal vagus response over to the ventral vagus, which is our more kind of sophisticated response system, which is myelinated and responds better, that we're wondering whether or not we're actually shifting that over so it doesn't have to be this conscious thought of I don't want to go into fight or flight or freeze. I'm going to do my breathing and respond in a more conscious way. But if tapping actually helps that happen automatically, we're getting people back to responding from that ventral vagus, which is really our modern way of responding that shouldn't be affected too much by those kind of really deeper evolutionary responses that were about fight and flight, that type of thing. So that's the theory. We're looking at the numbers at the moment, so I'm waiting on Stephen's team to get back to me. But even just looking at it myself, and I tested my own vagus nerve, so I don't have chronic pain, but I've tapped for 18 years, and I could test my own and kind of go, I don't look like a chronic pain patient, so I don't
Yeah.
have obviously one from 18 years ago, but you can definitely see differences in people that
Yeah.
perhaps have tapped for a long time that don't
Yeah.
have these symptoms. just
Yeah.
in that vague return activity. So it's quite cool to have all these gadgets in my office that,
Yeah,
you know.
exactly, exactly, exactly. Well, I like just when I go to the doctor and they're like, "You don't take any meds? You're not on any meds, you're not on any," and I'm like, they're like, "What do you do?" I go, "I tap, I do energy work, I do energy this, or da, 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 da," and I'll be 70 pretty soon, so I'm like, like,
Wow.
I know, I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm just tapping away, like, whatever works for me, baby. So,
Mm.
yeah, it's the same and what I love about the tapping too, which it's not talked that much, but as you're tapping with the clients, you're not being vicariously traumatized. You're not you can hear anything, you can go all day, in my experience, and so I could see and I could hear these traumatic things, people could share things with me, and I wasn't shocking my brain, and I'm just
Mhm.
tapping along with them and quieting everything down. So you do this for hours every day. I mean, I figure I should have run out of issues by now, but I don't know about that, but, they just you feel better, you feel b you just it's such a and the other thing I love about it is so self-empowering.
Yeah.
They don't my clients don't need me. They don't, they have their tapping, they have their this, they have their that.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
absolutely. And I think, even the little ones, we've had school research emerging and, primary school children kind of and self-applied. So they don't need to, they can just learn to tap and, don't have as many layers as those of us that have got decades and they
right,
tap for a couple of minutes and off they
right,
run. So, and even schools embracing it worldwide.
yeah.
Like we have thousands of teachers now that have trained in tapping, from Alaska to, Tasmania to,
Uh-huh.
England
Uh,
to New Zealand and they're all using it, even in these, kind of natural disasters or even things like the school shootings.
yeah,
They're embracing tapping
yeah,
because of the speed of which it works, the fact that it can be self applied. And, kids don't question it. I like the little ones because they're like, oh, yeah, makes me feel better. I'll just
yeah,
do it. I'm not going to
yeah,
ask about the science.
yeah.
They just off they go. And I just think, that's such a gift, for the kids
Such a
moving
gift.
forward. But
It's just
yeah, it's been a bit of a side
all the
tangent
trauma
here.
that's happening and the unpredictability,
Yeah.
and they're
Yeah.
watching their parents be so scared with they might get the corona.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just too much, going
Yeah.
on. So
Yeah.
again,
And I do have one piece of exciting kind of
okay, well,
information to share with you guys. So we've always had this question in the tapping space about is it evidence based? So,
mhm,
what does that mean? And ultimately, the American Psychological Association are the body that have a website that's the Division 12 psychological treatments page. Anyone can go and have a look at that. And that's where they actually put our listing of all the research that's been evaluated for different conditions and things like that. So, for the first time ever, the APA has given us permission. So, a team that I'm leading, we've got researchers around the world that will evaluate tapping for PTSD and trauma in 2022 to be listed on that evidence-based website. So we're kind of from a research point of view, kind of going like this because it's the first time ever, and obviously we need to go through the process. But
yeah,
within 12 months' time, we'll be able to have another conversation because that's what we've been waiting for is
yeah.
those type of nods and acknowledgements and they're happening all around the place. Even our government does acknowledge tapping for disability and things like that, but
It does
to
or
have
does not.
it does,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. So we are covered here in Australia under a
yeah.
national disability scheme. People can access EFT tapping, that's all covered, a whole
Oh,
range of
that's
other
great.
different
Yeah,
yeah, so we have got
yeah,
some movement that's happening.
yeah,
But to have that kind of coming out and that approval process, has been a bit of a win for the field. So
yeah.
I look forward to coming back in maybe 12 months' time telling you how that goes. I'm a hero.
Exactly, exactly. Awesome. That'd be so awesome. Yeah, it's just to me the research catching up. Clinically we see things first, and then eventually the research catches up. And I was blessed when I first started doing tapping. I worked at an HMO, and so everybody was insured there. And when and I had a huge clinical staff with me, psychiatry, psychologist, and then there's me doing this. First, I was doing EMDR, then I was doing this, and they were like, "What is she doing in there?" But one of the psychiatrists said, We don't really, we kind of leave her alone because her people get better and they're not ending up in the hospital. It's not costing them anything. So we're kind of like, we don't always know what she's doing, but we leave her alone." I'm thinking, what do you think I'm doing? Reading tarot cards in here? Like, wow. you know,
Yeah.
but my people are getting off meds, they're not in the hospital, flashbacks are stopping. And so I had such amazing support in the 90s to be able to
Mm,
do this when it
mm.
was, talk therapy was king
Yep.
and
Yeah.
it was such a blessing for me to be able
Yeah.
to just
It's
go with it
fantastic.
and people get better and then gather all this evidence and strategies to move it. What are you finding about I think heard you speak about is there research about touching or tapping versus above the body? Did I hear you say something
Yes. Yeah.
that
There's actually been a study that came out in 2020 from German researchers where they did an MRI study, but on imaginal tapping. So this is the one about, even if you tapped above or just imagine tapping. So they put people inside an MRI machine and did functional MRI and showed them images that were either something that evoked the feeling of fear, something that evoked the feeling of disgust, or just neutral calm. They taught them the tapping points, but this is really interesting with what we said before, Mary. No words. So just taught them 16 tapping points, so 16 known acupoints,
Mhm.
and then said, just pick three that you like or remember the best, the most. So just pick three of them. And when you're inside the machine and the image comes up that feeling of fear, disgust, or whatever comes up, just imagine tapping on three of those points while you're in there and just keep a track of the feeling. And then the next image would come up, that type of thing. And they have shown in that imagined tapping, so whether or not that's just close my eyes, imagine, or even if I'm just doing this, the same parts of the brain activate and we're able to reduce, the amygdala expression, that type of thing, reduce the feelings of fear, disgust down to that neutral level and see the parts of the brain still activating by imagining tapping. So we know in that visual cortex sort of research that's been done,
Right.
the Army uses it and the Navy and things like that. NASA's been using imagined visual rehearsal for years that the brain still fires. So we actually have a whole bank of research around that kind of, visualization sort of research. But now we know too that if you lie, and I particularly think this is good if you're trying to use tapping for insomnia and sleep issues, you can
Right.
just lie there and imagine tapping,
Right.
maybe just focus in on what's happening for you. My mind's racing, whatever. And it works. So to have like not only just a clinical trial, but MRI that shows that, like
Right.
to high five the Germans from over here and kind of go, this is genius because
Exactly. We'll have to
we always thought it worked, but now we have
and
very
it didn't matter which points they tapped or with the
no,
emotion because there's
no,
correlates
so
with the meridians and
yeah,
the emotions, correct? But
that's
what are
right.
you seeing with
Yes.
that? Does it matter like if it or you just have to but what are you seeing like if they just tap any place on the body versus the
Yeah.
neighboring point? Anything with that?
Yes, yeah. So there is a whole lot of research coming out from that dismantling point of view, where if you tap on a sham point, so say underneath the arm here with the palm of my hand, because finger points have meridian
Right.
points. So if we were to go like this, and that's one of the best sham tappings, is just to go there. We don't see any statistical significance in the outcome. So whether that's for anxiety, there was a burnout study done in teachers. Those teachers that did this didn't get a significant reduction. But tapping on the known acupoint, so you've
Right.
got finger points activated as well as, say, the ones that we know are
Right.
there, then we get statistically significant reductions without the teachers even knowing. So that particular study was
Right.
really sound. They didn't even know. They were just like, oh, I'm learning this, that might help. So if you don't, so that's a
Right.
realistic
Right.
threshold trial.
Right.
But a really interesting study that only came out this year in 2021 by Korean researchers, if I'm getting that right, is they actually injected dye into the primovascular system in the body and found that the dye actually kind of converges on the known acupoints in acupuncture. So you don't get convergence of that dye in the body, you only get them on the vascular structure that we know as an acupuncture point. So we actually have more evidence as of 2021 that the acupuncture system that we're using is real. It's not energetic. It's physical, it's vascular. It's called the primovascular system. And so for a long time, hundreds of years ago, they thought it was energetic. It's smaller than a capillary system. And if you put dye into it, you actually can see what they call the anatomical kind of structure points having the condensation of dye, but nowhere else. So it's like
So you mean like, okay, so you know you see those acupuncture guys with all those little points all over them? That actually shows up like that?
that is a physical system in the body. It's not energetic. They've shown that in the primovascular research. So fantastic. So my biggest takeaway to tell people is make sure you actually hit the acupuncture point. Must sure you
Right,
hit
right,
because they actually do know
right.
that is really important because they
Right.
don't exist everywhere. They're not everywhere in the body. So if you're tapping up here too high, you need to come down to where
Right,
no.
to hear, right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Well, it's funny that I hear that because I oftentimes with clients, like they would hit like this under the arm point, spleen meridian. And when you hit it, and it was I always say, find the part spot that's tender, and they would hit that, and they would sometimes tell me something shifted right there, like or this
It's
point,
the
or
same as, like, people that tap around here, the
yeah.
point's actually in the center of your head, so you're better to use a flat hand and tap like that, which actually
Rather than like a lot of people, they do this in
better than
Asia.
around. Yeah, because you may not hit it if you're actually going around. If you use a flat hand, you're destined to hit where they all converge because they actually all converge there.
Like right
Actually,
here at the crown, right? They all
yeah, right there on that crown, that's right.
yeah,
So
sometimes they do that.
knowing some of that that's sort of emerging and then the tapping, you're like, we've been onto something here. And it's interesting, in medicine, the medical field, there's a suggestion that it takes 17 years for new therapies to become mainstream.
Oh, good.
And
We're past it.
yeah, that's right. I reckon we're at the 18-year mark, and that translational gap of 17 years in medicine
Yeah.
seems to be quite true in the therapy world as well. So
Oh,
when
glad I'm
to get that APA kind of nod to yes, go and do the evidence research, it was like, yeah, we're right there. It was like with the tipping point for tapping,
yeah.
it's right there. So
Oh,
I'm
that's so cool. How about, is there any research about the eye movements, the nine gamut or the brain part where you're moving, close your eyes, open them? What does the brain show on that? Do you have anything on that?
yeah, the EFT world has not researched as much in that purely because the EMDR world, like uses the eye movements. And that is suggested to be a really strong component for EMDR and taxing working memory. The EFT world clinically, those of us that started this 15 years ago, made a decision to only test the tapping points, clinical EFT, so just 8 points, and not to use the nine gamut. Now, the reason for that was really there was some, I guess, question was tapping just a derivative of EMDR because of the eye movements?
Okay.
And had we done the research and kept the nine gamut in there, which is highly effective for trauma, and we do teach it clinically, of course,
Yeah.
we did have a feeling 15 years ago that we had something different happening than the taxing
Right.
working memory theory of the eye movements. So we actually made a decision not to include it. And lo and behold, it has worked that tapping on the 8 points only in clinical EFT in all the trials does get the outcomes. And so whether or not the eye movements adds another layer to that, but we didn't want to be necessarily seen as just a derivative of EMDR because I actually don't think EFT is. I think they both live in the same camp, the fourth wave of therapy,
Right.
that's somatic body based. Both think they get, and we've had EFT, EMDR comparisons, and guess what? They get exactly the same outcomes. So we
They
actually
do.
go,
Yeah.
yes, yes. So which means they're getting the same outcome, just two different pathways.
Right.
So absolutely nine gamut eye movements are highly effective and we do teach them, but we don't test them in clinical research for that reason that we actually want to see, does the tapping get the outcome without that element? And the answer is yes.
I would love to see, and put this in your someday file, but some comparing without the eye movements and when with it, because
Yeah.
I still keep the eye movements in. I find it super powerful, super vaster because you're doing it because it just adds something to it. I've had clients say when my eyes went here, something happened, or in my eyes, and we know when the eyes go in different
You
parts,
know.
what it's doing in the
Yeah.
brain. So many people now when they learn EFT, they don't even know about the eye movements.
No, no.
And I was like, "Are you kidding me? That's like you need that." I don't know if you need it, but it's like, it's sure great to know, it's like
Yeah.
not having oil in the car, Yeah, yeah, the gasoline's great, but like we need so I would love to someday compare the 2.
I'll
So
put it on the someday file. I will.
put that in your
I
eye
do
down
know.
when you run out of things to test. I would love to see some research on that because
Okay.
I am
Yeah.
passionate about keeping that in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
for me, it just yeah, the thing that I just probably I could say disturbs me the most is all the people who say, "Oh, I did EFT, but it didn't work." I'm like, "You didn't do the full EFT. Wait a minute, you need to
Yeah.
know, let's do
Yeah.
this, let's add this, let's,
Yeah. 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 That's
and up your success because it's so possible. It's so
true.
possible.
True.
What would you say is a study that shocked you the most? Like that you just didn't expect to get what you got? And did you have any of your some favorite one?
Yeah, look, that German study was one of those, though we didn't run it. That was fantastic with the imaginal tapping. Even, some of these studies coming out, of the acupuncture field, that one with the dye, we're like, oh, that's
That's
amazing.
great.
Things like that. It always makes me laugh when we do our follow-up studies. So if we're doing, 12-month, 2-year follow-up and, you know, it never ceases to surprise me. People just look at you blankly, and I just love that moment. And I remind them what they tapped on. You were eating this, and they look, and they're like, I don't remember that. Like they don't that apex effect. They just don't remember. I just love those kind of clinical
Mhm.
outcomes that people,
Yeah.
and just getting those messages. We get the emails over time where people just send you through saying, you changed my life. My chronic pain. Like that is such a
That
devastating. And
is
we've gone into that space. That kind of thing to sort of say, like, I still kind of feel humbled. Even after all these decades, to sort of you get those emails that people are like, I'd never heard of this. Someone told me about your trial. I was skeptical. I thought this is ridiculous. And lo and behold, it worked. So it's probably not, you know, necessarily a topic or a trial that was published, but it's those moments in time. And as a practitioner, you would get the same that,
yeah.
you just see that release or you
Yeah.
see that outcome in front of you. And it might be mid round of tapping and they just look at you and they think, what just
Yeah.
happened? And we're like, it's gone. So,
It's
yeah,
gone. And I let now a lot of my work is working with parts, doing parts and integrating
yeah,
parts with the tap
integrating. Yes.
and getting
Nice.
it and bringing the parts in and they're like and I bring them back to that the child part to present time and I have this whole way of doing it but, and incorporating tapping and they're like I'm back. Like uh, it's like they're full again and you can see you can see them they're just like and they're here. That their trauma's over. There's in fact, one time I remember I was working with this guy and we were working on he had a suicide attempt when he was in the military. And we were working on that memory, and he said to me, it was so weird. That's why I think the eyes are important. He said, "Out of this eye, I'm looking at you. Out of this eye," and I could have my eyes mixed up because it was a long time ago. "Out of one eye, I'm looking at you. When I cover that and look out the other eye, I'm still in the barracks." It
Mm,
was so busy, and we just moved those we did our tapping with the eye movements in the middle, and he
mm,
both eyes, he was here. It was over.
mm.
So I to me, they it just feels when trauma happens, you leave part of you behind, and so that's just so much of the work I'm doing now in bringing these
Mm,
parts back, and people
yeah,
just get their lives it's like they're here. They're, like, fully here, and there's no and you don't go back. You that's what I mean, like what you're saying. They don't even remember. It's like yeah, that like a memory, like I always say to myself, like, "What did I wear last week? Did I wear that?" Like, it's gonna that's how they are about this, like, was just in a car accident. And woo woo, you know?
yes,
And
yeah.
there's just no charge to it, and they're free, and, there's nothing like it, just nothing like it. So,
Yeah.
I'm so grateful that you are doing the research and all the researchers are there to kinda make the rest of us not look a little nutty for tapping on faces and moving on there. And
No, we love it.
we're
We love
trying to
it.
convince it. Well, now I have papers, and
That's right.
we have that. So anything else you'd like to share that I didn't ask you or that you
Oh, oh, I don't know, Mary. Look, I guess my line to everybody, even if they're kind of skeptical or this is new, is yeah, just stay open. There is so much. One of the things that people don't realize is we actually now have hundreds, like almost 300 papers in the energy psychology space. And, when you drill down, 98% of those papers show significant outcomes. Like, that's incredible. And we have another 70 odd papers that have been published in non English, so foreign language journals.
That
So those trials are emerging out of countries that English is not the first language, but they're running these trials as well. So when you put all that together, and we're looking at, almost 400 published papers in this space that show this incredible outcome statistic, stay open to the possibility that what we're doing is not crazy tapping on our face. We're actually gifting something happening here, and be curious about, wow, I wonder if that could help me. And yeah,
wow,
it's
awesome.
really good.
Well, I want to share your book. I have it right here for everybody.
Thank you.
The science behind tapping. It's like,
Yes,
that is
that's right.
Stapleton. I'm
Yeah.
telling you, get this book if if you're one of those skeptical people. If you're somebody who just says, I'm in, jump in, then just go for it. But when you read this, that it just adds a grounding to what is the face validity of tapping is not very good. So it looks a little weird, but it works and it will just serve you. Just teach it to the children. Just please teach it to children. Teach it to everyone. And, thank you. I just can't thank you enough. I'm so excited we have
Thank you, Mary.
thank you.
It's just been fabulous.